Jack Harper's Saturday mornings usually followed the same routine. He'd wake up early, lace up his worn-out sneakers, and take a brisk walk down Main Street, greeting familiar faces and exchanging polite nods with his neighbors. It was the kind of morning that made life in their small town feel timeless, a peaceful ritual that he had grown to appreciate more with each passing year. But this Saturday was destined to be anything but ordinary. Jack strolled into the local grocery store, his canvas shopping bag in hand. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, its cheerful chime signaling his arrival to the staff he'd known for years. He waved to Carol, the store manager, who was busy restocking shelves near the entrance. "Morning, Jack," she called out with a smile. "Morning, Carol. Looks like you've got a busy day ahead," Jack replied, glancing at the half-empty shelves. "Always," she said with a shrug, disappearing down an aisle. The store was bustling with weekend shoppers. Parents wrangled restless children, seniors carefully examined fresh produce, and couples debated dinner plans over the meat counter. Jack headed straight for the coffee aisle, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he thought about the strong cup waiting for him at home. As he rounded the corner to the checkout lanes, he noticed Sarah Lewis at the register. She was a familiar face in the store, a young woman who had started working there a few months ago. Jack had exchanged pleasantries with her on occasion, noting her friendly demeanor and hard-working attitude. But today, something caught his eye, a small U.S. flag pin on her uniform, its red, white, and blue colors gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Jack felt a pang of pride. The flag pin reminded him of his own days in the service, a time when duty and sacrifice were second nature. He didn't know much about Sarah's background, but the pin spoke volumes to him. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried a weight of respect and patriotism that he admired. As Jack moved toward the register, a sharp voice cut through the hum of the store. "Excuse me, but is that really necessary?" The voice belonged to a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored coat and carrying a designer handbag. She was standing in Sarah's checkout line, her expression a mixture of irritation and disdain. Sarah looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Is something wrong?" "That," the woman said, pointing directly at Sarah's flag pin. "I find it offensive. Why are you wearing that? This is a grocery store, not some political rally." The air seemed to thicken as her words echoed across the checkout area. Shoppers nearby paused mid-conversation, their attention drawn to the commotion. Sarah's cheeks flushed red, and she instinctively reached up to touch the pin. "It's just a pin, ma'am. It's something I wear to honor my family. My father and brother both served in the military." The woman scoffed, her voice growing louder. "Well, maybe you should keep your personal beliefs to yourself. Not everyone wants to see that while they're shopping. It's divisive, and frankly, it's inappropriate." Jack's grip on his shopping bag tightened. He felt a surge of anger rising in his chest, but he held his tongue, observing the situation unfold. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry if it offends you, ma'am. That wasn't my intention." "Sorry isn't good enough," the woman snapped. "You should take it off. This is a public place, and you're representing this store." By now, a small crowd had gathered, their carts abandoned as they watched the confrontation. Some whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from shock to disapproval. Others stood silently, their faces a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Jack knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, that's enough." The woman turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are?" Jack met her gaze, his posture unwavering. "I'm someone who believes in respecting others, especially those who've earned it. That pin isn't just a decoration. It represents sacrifice, honor, and service. If you can't see that, then maybe the problem isn't with the pin." The woman's face turned red, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. The crowd murmured in agreement, a ripple of support spreading through the onlookers. Sarah glanced at Jack, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "I don't need a lecture from you," the woman finally said, her voice shaking. "This has nothing to do with you." Jack took a deep breath, his tone remaining steady. "It has everything to do with all of us. That flag represents the freedoms we enjoy every day, including the freedom to speak your mind, even if it's to insult someone who's done nothing wrong. But maybe it's time to think about what that freedom cost and who paid the price." The woman looked around, as if searching for support, but the crowd remained silent. Some nodded in agreement with Jack's words, while others simply watched, their expressions thoughtful. Sarah found her voice, addressing the woman with a quiet strength. "Ma'am, I wear this pin because it reminds me of my dad and my brother. They taught me to be proud of where I come from and to stand up for what I believe in. I'm sorry if that bothers you, but I won't take it off." The woman stared at Sarah, her expression softening for a brief moment before she turned on her heel and walked out of the store without another word. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, replaced by a wave of applause from the crowd. Sarah looked down, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. Jack placed his hand on the counter, offering her a reassuring smile. "You handled that with grace, Sarah. Your dad and brother would be proud." "Thank you, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what to do." "You did just fine," Jack replied. "Sometimes, standing your ground is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most important." As the crowd began to disperse and the store returned to its usual rhythm, Jack paid for his groceries and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned back to Sarah. "If anyone gives you trouble again, you let me know. You're not alone in this." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I won't forget that. Thank you." Jack walked out into the crisp morning air, his heart heavy but resolute. He didn't know what the rest of the day would bring, but he was certain of one thing: standing up for what's right, no matter how small the gesture, could make a world of difference. The grocery store buzzed with the ordinary sounds of life resuming, the beeping of scanners, the rustling of paper bags, and the low hum of conversations. Outside, Jack Harper paused on the curb, his grocery bag dangling from his hand, his thoughts still lingering on the confrontation he had just witnessed. The scene had struck a nerve, stirring memories that he had long tucked away in the corners of his mind. Jack wasn't the kind of man who sought out attention or confrontation. His life had been one of quiet service and steady resolve. A retired army sergeant, Jack had returned to his hometown years ago, seeking the solace of familiarity after decades of deployments and military life. He had grown used to the rhythm of small-town existence, with its predictable routines and unspoken camaraderie. Yet moments like this reminded him that even in the most unassuming places, courage and character could be tested in unexpected ways. He glanced back toward the store's windows, where he could see Sarah working the register again, her movements precise but a little more subdued than before. Her resilience reminded him of the young recruits he used to train, wide-eyed and eager but carrying their own burdens. He felt a pang of empathy for her, so young, yet forced to defend something so personal in such a public setting. As Jack walked home, the crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of wood smoke, mingling with the chatter of children playing in a nearby park. His house was a modest, single-story structure at the end of a quiet street, its porch adorned with a carefully folded flag that hung in honor of his late brother, David, who had also served. The flag was a constant reminder of the sacrifices their family had made and the ideals they had stood for. Jack couldn't help but think of Sarah's quiet pride in wearing her flag pin, a symbol that had unintentionally sparked such discord. After unpacking his groceries and putting on a fresh pot of coffee, Jack settled into his favorite chair by the window. His thoughts wandered to the years he'd spent overseas, where the flag had been more than a piece of fabric, it had been a beacon of hope, a symbol of unity for soldiers from all walks of life. He remembered moments when the sight of it flying high had lifted spirits in the bleakest circumstances. To see someone criticize that symbol so casually was disheartening, but it also reminded him of the freedoms it represented, including the right to voice dissent. The incident at the store weighed heavily on him, not because of the woman's words, he had heard worse, but because of the way Sarah had been forced to justify something that should never have needed an explanation. Jack knew all too well how such moments could linger in a person's mind, leaving behind questions about their worth and the values they upheld. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack decided to do something he rarely did. He picked up the phone and called his old friend Tom Daniels. Tom was a fellow veteran and a local high school teacher who often spoke about the importance of community and mentorship. Jack figured if anyone would understand the significance of what had happened, it would be Tom. "Jack." Tom's voice boomed through the receiver. "It's been a while. How've you been?" "Not bad," Jack replied, his tone measured. "Listen, something happened today at the grocery store, and I can't seem to shake it." Tom listened intently as Jack recounted the confrontation in detail. When Jack finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sounds like you handled it just fine," Tom said finally. "But I get why it's sticking with you. It's not just about the pin, is it?" Jack sighed. "No, it's not. It's about what that pin represents and the fact that someone like Sarah, someone young and full of promise, has to defend it in the first place. It feels like we've lost sight of what it means to respect each other." Tom's voice softened. "You know, Jack, maybe this is one of those moments where you can make a difference. You've got the respect of this town, and people listen when you speak. Maybe it's time to remind them what that flag really stands for." Jack mulled over Tom's words long after they ended the call. He wasn't one to seek the spotlight, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he needed to do more than just intervene in the heat of the moment. The next day, he decided to visit Sarah at the store, hoping to check in and offer her some encouragement. When he arrived, the store was quieter than usual, the lull of a Sunday morning creating a more subdued atmosphere. Sarah was stocking shelves near the back, her movements efficient but lacking their usual energy. Jack approached her, his presence immediately drawing her attention. "Mr. Harper," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "What brings you back so soon?" Jack smiled. "Just thought I'd see how you're holding up." Sarah hesitated, her hands pausing mid-reach. "I'm okay, I guess. It's been a little weird, though. Some people have been really supportive, but others, not so much. I even got a few comments online after someone posted about what happened." Jack frowned. "Comments, huh? Let me guess, some were less than kind." She nodded, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. "Yeah. It's strange how something so small can cause such a big reaction. But I'm not taking the pin off. It means too much to me." Jack's respect for Sarah grew in that moment. Her resolve reminded him of the young soldiers he had once mentored, their determination shining through despite the challenges they faced. He decided then and there to take Tom's advice and turn this experience into something meaningful, not just for Sarah, but for the entire community. Over the next few days, Jack reached out to local veterans, business owners, and community leaders, sharing the story of what had happened and proposing an idea, a town-wide event to celebrate the values of unity, respect, and service. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing a desire to help. The event, titled Flags of Honor, was set to take place in the town square the following weekend. It would feature speeches from veterans, a display of historical flags, and a special ceremony to honor local service members and their families. Jack made sure to include Sarah in the planning, knowing how important it was for her to see the support of her community firsthand. As the event approached, word spread quickly, drawing attention from neighboring towns and even local media outlets. By the time Saturday arrived, the square was filled with people of all ages, their faces lit with anticipation. American flags waved in the breeze, their colors vibrant against the clear blue sky. Jack stood at the podium, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. He spoke about the significance of the flag and the values it represented, weaving in stories from his own experiences and the sacrifices he had witnessed. He emphasized the importance of unity, even in the face of differing opinions, and the need to stand up for what was right. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone with a mixture of nerves and determination. She shared her story, her voice gaining strength as she spoke about her family's service and her pride in wearing the flag pin. Her words resonated deeply, drawing applause and cheers from the crowd. The event ended with a flag-raising ceremony, the crowd standing in silence as the national anthem played. As the flag reached the top of the pole, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The confrontation at the grocery store had been an uncomfortable moment, but it had also sparked a conversation that brought the community closer together. That evening, as Jack walked home, he felt lighter than he had in days. He knew the journey toward greater understanding and respect was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt optimistic about the path ahead. Jack Harper woke early on Monday morning, stirred by a sense of purpose that had taken root over the weekend. The Flags of Honor event had sparked something profound in the town, a collective reckoning with values, respect, and unity. But the tension that had ignited the event was still fresh in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder about the ripple effects of the incident at the grocery store. As Jack sipped his morning coffee, the warmth of the mug against his hands, he thought about Sarah. She had handled herself with grace at the event, her speech inspiring the crowd and proving her resilience. But Jack also remembered the quiet vulnerability in her voice when she had confided in him about the backlash online. He knew that kind of scrutiny could weigh heavily on someone so young. Determined to ensure Sarah felt supported, Jack decided to check in with her again. On his way to the store, he noticed something unusual. A few houses along Main Street had hung American flags outside their windows, a gesture of solidarity he hadn't seen before. It was as if the community had collectively decided to reaffirm their pride and unity in response to recent events. The sight filled Jack with a quiet sense of satisfaction. When he arrived at the grocery store, the bell above the door jingled, and the familiar hum of activity greeted him. He found Sarah near the produce section, meticulously arranging a display of apples. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, though Jack could tell there was a trace of weariness in her expression. "Morning, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice bright but tinged with fatigue. "Didn't expect to see you so soon." Jack chuckled. "Thought I'd swing by and see how you're doing. You've been on my mind." Sarah straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm doing okay, I guess. The event on Saturday was amazing. I can't thank you enough for putting it together." "You gave a great speech," Jack said, his tone sincere. "You've got more strength than you realize." Sarah blushed, but her smile faltered. "It's been a lot to process. Some people have been really supportive, but there are still a few who, well, let's just say not everyone agrees with me wearing the pin." Jack frowned. "Still getting comments?" She nodded. "A few online, mostly. And one customer yesterday made a snide remark. It's not easy to ignore, but I'm trying." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. Don't forget that. And if anyone gives you trouble, you've got the whole town behind you now." Sarah's smile returned, this time more genuine. "Thanks, Mr. Harper. That means a lot." As Jack left the store, he couldn't shake the thought that the tension Sarah was facing wasn't isolated. The incident at the grocery store had exposed deeper divisions within the community, differences in perspective that weren't going to disappear overnight. Jack knew the Flags of Honor event had been a step in the right direction, but it was just the beginning. Later that day, Jack sat down at his kitchen table, pen in hand, and began drafting a letter to the editor of the local newspaper. He wanted to address the incident head-on, using it as an opportunity to spark a broader conversation about respect, unity, and the values that tied the community together. The words came slowly at first, but as he wrote, his thoughts crystallized into a heartfelt message. The letter was published in the next edition of the newspaper, its headline simple yet powerful, "A Call for Unity." In it, Jack recounted the confrontation at the grocery store and the impact it had on Sarah, himself, and the community as a whole. He spoke about the importance of standing up for one another, even in the face of disagreement, and urged his neighbors to focus on what united them rather than what divided them. The letter quickly gained attention, sparking conversations throughout the town. Some readers praised Jack's words, calling them a much-needed reminder of the town's shared values. Others challenged his perspective, arguing that freedom of expression included the right to critique symbols like the flag. While the responses varied, one thing was clear: Jack's letter had struck a chord, and people were talking. Among those who read the letter was the woman who had confronted Sarah at the store. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and she had lived in the town for decades, though she kept to herself for the most part. Evelyn's outburst at the store had been driven by personal pain. Her son, a soldier, had died in combat years ago, and she had never fully come to terms with his loss. The sight of Sarah's flag pin had triggered a flood of emotions she hadn't been prepared to face, and her reaction had been more about her own unresolved grief than any true objection to the pin itself. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, the newspaper spread out in front of her. As she read Jack's letter, she felt a pang of guilt for the way she had treated Sarah. The words, "standing up for one another," echoed in her mind, and she realized how far she had strayed from the values she claimed to hold dear. She decided then and there to make amends. The next day, Evelyn walked into the grocery store, her heart pounding. She spotted Sarah at the register, busy scanning items for a customer. When it was her turn, Evelyn approached cautiously, unsure of how to begin. "Hi," she said softly, her voice trembling. Sarah looked up, startled to see the woman who had confronted her. "Oh. Hello." Evelyn hesitated, then took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize. For what I said the other day. It wasn't right, and I'm sorry." Sarah blinked, clearly surprised. "Thank you. That means a lot." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "My son, he served in the military. And when I saw your pin, it brought up a lot of feelings I wasn't ready to deal with. But that's no excuse for the way I treated you." Sarah's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. And I understand. The pin means a lot to me because of my family, too." The two women stood there for a moment, the tension between them replaced by a quiet understanding. When Evelyn left the store, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, as if she had finally taken the first step toward healing. Word of Evelyn's apology spread quickly, further solidifying the sense of unity that had begun to take hold in the town. Jack, hearing about the exchange from Sarah, felt a deep sense of pride, not just in Sarah, but in the community as a whole. It wasn't easy to confront one's mistakes, but Evelyn's actions showed that change was possible, even in the face of deep-seated pain. As the days turned into weeks, the town continued to rally around the values that had been highlighted during the Flags of Honor event. Schools began incorporating lessons about respect and unity into their curriculums, and local organizations launched initiatives to support veterans and their families. The grocery store even started a Wall of Honor, where customers could post photos and stories of loved ones who had served. Through it all, Jack remained a quiet but steadfast presence, offering guidance and support where it was needed. He knew the work wasn't done, unity was an ongoing effort, not a one-time achievement. But as he watched the town come together, he felt a renewed sense of hope. For Sarah, the experience had been transformative. She had faced criticism and adversity, but she had also discovered her own strength and the power of standing up for what she believed in. With Jack's encouragement, she began exploring ways to serve her community even further, eventually applying for a scholarship to attend a leadership program for young adults. One evening, as Sarah prepared her application essay, she thought back to the day at the grocery store when everything had changed. What had started as a moment of conflict had become a catalyst for growth, not just for her, but for the entire town. And she knew, deep down, that none of it would have been possible without the quiet courage of Jack Harper. As Sarah submitted her essay, she felt a sense of clarity about her future. She didn't know exactly where her path would lead, but she was certain of one thing. She would carry the lessons of this experience with her, using them to inspire others just as Jack had inspired her. The town square buzzed with energy as the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the buildings that framed the heart of the community. Jack Harper stood near the flagpole, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, his mind replaying the events of the past few weeks. It had been a whirlwind. A simple, ordinary trip to the grocery store had unraveled into a defining moment for not just Sarah, but for the entire town. The transformation was palpable. Yet, as Jack stood there, he knew the story was far from over. The weeks following the Flags of Honor event had brought waves of both progress and challenges. Sarah had found her voice, stepping confidently into a role she hadn't anticipated, a young leader in a small town looking for unity amidst division. Evelyn Carter's apology had set an important precedent, but Jack understood that healing a community went deeper than one event, one gesture, or one apology. There was work to do, and it required consistency and resilience. Jack found himself at the center of this work. The letter he had written to the local newspaper had become a catalyst for discussions in schools, at church meetings, and in coffee shops. It was as though he had given people permission to speak openly about the unspoken tensions that had been brewing for years. He didn't shy away from these conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they became. Jack had always been a man who preferred action over words, but now he realized the power in fostering dialogue. One evening, Jack received a phone call from a teacher at the local high school. Miss Thompson, a social studies educator who had grown up in the town, reached out to thank him for inspiring her students. "Mr. Harper, your letter really struck a chord with the kids," she said. "They've been asking a lot of questions about the flag, about service, and what it all means. I was wondering if you'd be willing to come in and speak to them." Jack hesitated. Public speaking wasn't his strong suit, and the thought of standing in front of a classroom full of teenagers made him nervous. But the sincerity in Miss Thompson's voice and the opportunity to connect with the younger generation pushed him to agree. The following week, Jack found himself standing at the front of a classroom, the curious eyes of high school juniors and seniors fixed on him. Miss Thompson introduced him warmly, her enthusiasm helping to ease his nerves. "This is Mr. Jack Harper," she said, smiling. "He's a veteran and a pillar of our community. He's here to share his experiences and answer your questions about service, patriotism, and the values that bring us together." Jack cleared his throat, glancing at the students before beginning. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady but reserved. "I'll be honest with you, I'm not much of a public speaker. But I'm here today because I believe in the importance of what you're discussing. The flag, it's more than a symbol. It's a reminder of the sacrifices people have made so that we can live freely, speak our minds, and make our own choices." As he spoke, he noticed the students leaning in, their attention unwavering. He shared stories from his time in the military, moments that had shaped his understanding of duty and resilience. He told them about the friends he had lost, the lessons he had learned, and the pride he felt every time he saw the flag raised high. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before a student raised her hand. "Mr. Harper, do you think people still respect the flag the way they used to?" Jack took a deep breath. "I think respect looks different to everyone. Some show it by standing at attention during the national anthem. Others show it by speaking out when they believe something is wrong. What matters is that we try to understand each other, even when we don't agree. Respect isn't just about symbols, it's about how we treat one another. The discussion that followed was lively, with students sharing their thoughts and asking questions that challenged Jack in the best way. He left the classroom that day feeling a renewed sense of purpose, knowing he had planted seeds of understanding in young minds. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to face her own set of challenges. While many in the community had rallied around her, there were still moments when she felt the weight of the scrutiny she had endured. The viral nature of the grocery store incident had drawn attention from outside the town, and not all of it was positive. Online comments ranged from supportive to cruel, and Sarah found herself struggling to ignore the negativity. Jack noticed the toll it was taking on her and decided to invite her over for a quiet evening at his house. He made a simple dinner, grilled chicken and fresh vegetables, and the two sat on his porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Sarah," Jack began, his tone gentle, "I can see this has been tough on you. I've been meaning to tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was your age." Sarah looked at him, her expression open and curious. "People will always have opinions," Jack said. "Some will lift you up, and others will try to tear you down. But at the end of the day, the only opinion that truly matters is the one you have of yourself. You stood your ground, and you did it with grace and integrity. Don't let anyone take that from you." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "It's just hard sometimes. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Jack said. "But sometimes life has a way of putting us in places we didn't expect. You have the strength to rise to the occasion, even when it's hard." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway. Jack and Sarah turned to see Evelyn Carter approaching, holding a small bouquet of flowers. She looked nervous but determined, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the stems. "Good evening," Evelyn said, her voice tentative. Jack stood and gestured for her to join them. "Evelyn, good to see you. Come on up." Evelyn climbed the steps and extended the flowers to Sarah. "I wanted to give these to you," she said. "As another way of saying I'm sorry." Sarah accepted the bouquet, her smile warm. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. That means a lot." Evelyn sat down, her gaze distant. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About my son, and how angry I've been since I lost him. I think I took all that anger and aimed it at you, and that wasn't fair." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on Evelyn's. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how hard that must be." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Evelyn's words settling over them. Jack finally spoke, his voice steady. "Evelyn, it takes courage to admit when we're wrong. And it takes even more courage to confront the pain we carry. You're doing both, and that's something to be proud of." As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to lighter topics, and the tension that had once existed between Sarah and Evelyn began to dissolve. By the time Evelyn left, there was a sense of closure in the air, a feeling that healing, while not yet complete, was within reach. In the days that followed, Jack, Sarah, and Evelyn found themselves working together on various community projects. Evelyn joined the effort to expand the Wall of Honor at the grocery store, sharing her son's story and encouraging others to do the same. Sarah continued to grow in her confidence, inspired by the outpouring of support she received from friends, neighbors, and even strangers. For Jack, the experience was a reminder of the power of small actions to create lasting change. He had stepped in that day at the grocery store not to be a hero, but simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. Yet that moment had sparked a chain of events that transformed not just Sarah, but an entire community. And as Jack watched the town come together, he felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself, but in the people who had chosen to stand with him. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. And sometimes, that was enough. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. It's just hard sometimes. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, Jack said. But sometimes life has a way of putting us in places we didn't expect. You have the strength to rise to the occasion, even when it's hard. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway. Jack and Sarah turned to see Evelyn Carter approaching, holding a small bouquet of flowers. She looked nervous but determined, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the stems. "Good evening," Evelyn said, her voice tentative. Jack stood and gestured for her to join them. "Evelyn, good to see you. Come on up." Evelyn climbed the steps and extended the flowers to Sarah. "I wanted to give these to you," she said. "As another way of saying I'm sorry." Sarah accepted the bouquet, her smile warm. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. That means a lot." Evelyn sat down, her gaze distant. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About my son, and how angry I've been since I lost him. I think I took all that anger and aimed it at you, and that wasn't fair." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on Evelyn's. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how hard that must be." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Evelyn's words settling over them. Jack finally spoke, his voice steady. "Evelyn, it takes courage to admit when we're wrong. And it takes even more courage to confront the pain we carry. You're doing both, and that's something to be proud of." As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to lighter topics, and the tension that had once existed between Sarah and Evelyn began to dissolve. By the time Evelyn left, there was a sense of closure in the air, a feeling that healing, while not yet complete, was within reach. In the days that followed, Jack, Sarah, and Evelyn found themselves working together on various community projects. Evelyn joined the effort to expand the Wall of Honor at the grocery store, sharing her son's story and encouraging others to do the same. Sarah continued to grow in her confidence, inspired by the outpouring of support she received from friends, neighbors, and even strangers. For Jack, the experience was a reminder of the power of small actions to create lasting change. He had stepped in that day at the grocery store not to be a hero, but simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. Yet that moment had sparked a chain of events that transformed not just Sarah, but an entire community. And as Jack watched the town come together, he felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself, but in the people who had chosen to stand with him. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. And sometimes, that was enough. He recognized many familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and even Evelyn Carter, who sat quietly near the back, her expression contemplative. When Jack's name was called, he rose slowly, his steps deliberate as he approached the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. He adjusted the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the crowd before he began. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not here tonight as a politician or a leader. I'm here as your neighbor, your friend, and someone who loves this town as much as you do." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I found myself in the middle of a situation I never expected. I saw a young woman being criticized for wearing a simple pin, something that held deep meaning for her. And in that moment, I had a choice to make. I could stand by and let it happen, or I could step in and say something. I chose to speak up, not because I wanted attention, but because I believe in the values that pin represents: respect, service, and unity." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement while others leaned forward in their seats. Jack drew a deep breath before addressing the heart of the matter. "But this isn't just about a pin or a flag," he said. "It's about who we are as a community. It's about how we treat each other, even when we disagree. It's about recognizing that every single one of us has a story, a history, and a reason for the beliefs we hold. And if we can't find a way to honor that, then we're failing, not just as individuals, but as a town. His words hung in the air, their weight palpable. Jack scanned the crowd, his gaze lingering on Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. He continued, his voice growing stronger. We're not always going to see eye to eye. That's the reality of life. But what we can do is listen, to really listen, and try to understand where the other person is coming from. That's what respect looks like. That's what unity feels like. And that's what this town has the potential to embody. As Jack finished speaking, a wave of applause swept through the gymnasium. It wasn't the thunderous, overwhelming kind, but a steady, heartfelt response that spoke to the sincerity of his words. He returned to his seat, his heart pounding, but the look of gratitude on Sarah's face reassured him that he had done the right thing. The forum continued with residents taking turns at the microphone. Evelyn Carter stood and shared her own story, recounting her journey from anger and grief to understanding and reconciliation. Her vulnerability struck a chord with the audience, many of whom wiped away tears as she spoke. By the end of the evening, the gymnasium buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. Plans were made for community initiatives, including mentorship programs for youth, support groups for grieving families, and workshops on active listening and conflict resolution. The meeting had become more than a discussion, it was a turning point. In the weeks that followed, the town embraced these efforts with enthusiasm. Sarah took on a leadership role in the mentorship program, working closely with young people who admired her strength and resilience. Evelyn became a regular speaker at the support group, her openness inspiring others to confront their own pain. And Jack, ever the quiet force behind it all, continued to guide and encourage his neighbors, his actions speaking louder than words. One day, as Jack walked through the town square, he noticed a group of children gathered around the flagpole. They were part of Sarah's mentorship program, learning about the history and significance of the flag. Sarah stood at the center, her voice clear and confident as she shared what the symbol meant to her. Jack watched from a distance, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had always believed in the power of community, but seeing it come to life in such a tangible way was something else entirely. The incident at the grocery store had been a catalyst, but the true transformation had come from the people themselves, from their willingness to listen, to learn, and to grow. As Jack turned to leave, a young boy from the group ran up to him, holding a small paper flag he had made. "Mr. Harper," the boy said, his eyes wide with admiration. "This is for you. Thank you for helping our town." Jack accepted the flag, his throat tightening with emotion. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice soft. "But the real thanks goes to all of you, for showing what this town is capable of." The boy grinned and ran back to join the group, leaving Jack to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But as Jack looked out over the square, he felt a deep sense of hope that the lessons they had learned would endure, and that the bonds they had forged would carry them forward. In that moment, Jack knew that this was just the beginning. The road to unity was long, but together, they would walk it, one step at a time. And as the flag waved gently in the breeze, Jack felt a quiet certainty that they were on the right path. Jack Harper sat on the porch of his small house as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and violet. His fingers absently traced the edges of a small, hand-sewn flag Sarah had gifted him after the town hall meeting weeks ago. The gesture had been simple, but it carried a depth of meaning that Jack couldn't ignore. The flag symbolized everything they had fought for, not just in wars abroad, but in the quiet battles waged within their own community. The town had changed since that pivotal moment at the grocery store. A deeper sense of understanding had taken root, but as Jack well knew, the path toward unity wasn't linear. Progress came with its share of setbacks, and the challenges they faced had become more apparent as time wore on. One of those challenges surfaced on a chilly Monday morning, when Jack stopped by the local diner for breakfast. The place was bustling with its usual crowd of regulars, farmers, teachers, retirees, but the air was charged with a tension Jack couldn't ignore. As he slid into his usual booth, he overheard snippets of a heated conversation at the counter. "I'm just saying, not everyone needs to wear their beliefs on their sleeve," a man argued, his voice sharp. "This whole flag thing is getting out of hand. It's dividing us more than it's bringing us together." A woman responded, her tone equally firm. "Dividing us? How can you say that? The flag stands for all of us. If people can't see that, maybe they're the ones creating division." Jack sighed, his appetite suddenly dulled. The debate mirrored the very tensions he had hoped to ease. It wasn't the first time he'd heard these arguments, and he doubted it would be the last. While many in the community had embraced the efforts to foster unity, others clung to their frustrations, viewing the renewed focus on patriotism as exclusionary or performative. As Jack sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but think of Sarah. She had thrown herself into her role as a mentor and community leader, but he worried about the weight she carried. At only 21, she was navigating waters that even seasoned adults struggled to manage. Jack decided it was time to check in with her, to ensure she wasn't facing these challenges alone. That afternoon, Jack visited the community center where Sarah had been organizing a series of workshops for local youth. When he arrived, the sound of laughter and chatter spilled from the open doors. Inside, a group of children sat in a circle, their faces lit with enthusiasm as Sarah led them in a discussion about what the flag meant to them. Jack waited until the session ended before approaching her. Sarah greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. "Hey, Mr. Harper. What brings you here?" "I just wanted to see how you're holding up," Jack said, his tone gentle. "You've been doing a lot for this town. I hope you're taking time for yourself, too." Sarah chuckled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I'm okay. Busy, but okay. Honestly, it's been rewarding. Seeing these kids get excited about what we're doing makes it all worth it." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "You're making a difference, Sarah. But don't forget, it's okay to lean on others when things get tough. You don't have to carry this alone." Sarah's smile softened. "Thanks, Mr. Harper. That means a lot. And you're right. It's just, I feel like there's so much to do, and I don't want to let anyone down." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not letting anyone down. The work you're doing is already more than enough." As the weeks passed, the community's efforts continued to evolve. The mentorship program expanded, with more volunteers stepping forward to guide the next generation. Evelyn Carter, who had become an unexpected ally in the movement, organized a Memories of Service night at the town library, where veterans and their families shared stories of sacrifice and resilience. The event drew a crowd that spilled out onto the library's lawn, a testament to the growing sense of solidarity. Despite these strides, tensions occasionally flared. At a town council meeting, a heated debate erupted over whether the grocery store's Wall of Honor should include photos of non-military community members who had made significant contributions to the town. Some argued that the wall should remain dedicated to veterans, while others pushed for a broader interpretation of service. Jack found himself mediating the discussion, his calm demeanor helping to ease the friction. "Service comes in many forms," he said, addressing the room. "Yes, we should honor our veterans. But let's also recognize the teachers, the nurses, the firefighters, anyone who dedicates themselves to the betterment of this community. This wall isn't about division. It's about unity. Let's make it a place where everyone feels they belong." The council ultimately agreed to expand the wall, a decision that marked another step forward. Yet, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that these victories, while significant, were fragile. The unity they were building required constant care, like tending a garden that could easily become overrun with weeds. One evening, as Jack sat on his porch, Sarah joined him, a notebook clutched in her hands. She had taken to seeking Jack's advice whenever she faced a particularly thorny challenge, valuing his wisdom and steady presence. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, settling into the chair beside him. "About leaning on others. I realized I've been so focused on helping the town that I haven't taken much time to reflect on everything that's happened." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Reflection's important. It helps you see where you've been and where you're going." Sarah opened the notebook, revealing a page filled with scribbled notes and sketches. "I've been working on an idea, a community art project. Something that brings everyone together, no matter their background or beliefs. I want it to be a mural, painted by the people of this town, that represents what unity means to us." Jack's eyes lit up with approval. "That's a brilliant idea, Sarah. A mural would be a lasting reminder of what we've built here." The project quickly gained momentum, with Sarah rallying support from local artists, schools, and businesses. The town square became a hive of activity as residents of all ages gathered to contribute to the mural. The design, which featured the town's landmarks interwoven with symbols of unity and resilience, grew more vibrant with each passing day. On the mural's completion day, the entire community gathered to celebrate. As the final brushstrokes were applied, Jack found himself standing beside Evelyn and Sarah, their faces glowing with pride. The mural was more than a work of art, it was a testament to the journey they had undertaken together, a visual representation of their shared values and dreams for the future. As the crowd applauded, Sarah turned to Jack, her voice filled with gratitude. "None of this would have happened without you, Mr. Harper. You were the spark that lit the flame." Jack shook his head, a humble smile on his face. "All I did was speak up when it mattered. The rest, that's all of you." The celebration continued late into the evening, with music, laughter, and stories filling the air. Jack watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. He knew the road ahead would still hold challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The community had found its footing, and together, they would keep moving forward, one step at a time. As the night drew to a close, Jack walked home under a blanket of stars. The town had come a long way, and though the work was far from over, he was certain of one thing: they were stronger together. And that, he thought, was worth everything.